right, and now we are joined here in the studio by former Georgian President Mikheil Saakashvili, who is also recently appointed the head of the Advisory International Council of Reforms here in Ukraine. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
We have one concrete question for you to start off with, because it's one we've given a lot of people. What is one reform that more than anything needs to be done in Ukraine? Is there one concrete thing you'd want to see done?
Deregulation, which means that you have to dramatically cut bureaucracy and cut all kind of permits, licensing, all kind of, basically kill the discretion of bureaucrats.
And how do you do that?
You just go against their will. None of them would ever give them this up on their own, so you just force them to, basically you bring in new regulations where very little discretion is left. For instance, to give you an example, for instance, at customs you have things called as scissors. Somebody has to pay for, like, say, if you import a chair, you pay something between, like, for instance, like 500 hryvnias and 900 hryvnias. So it's up to discretion of the customs officer whether he charges you 500 or 900.
Which creates an incentive for corruption,
This is automatic corruption. And that, or you have all kind of things, and there are multiple bodies here whose task is to check on restaurants and cafes and shops and factories, so there are no fires, there is no like maybe sanitary conditions are right, but in real terms they don't check on anything except they're extorting money and they're just basically sucking out the juices from the business.
Which pushes up the price of investment of running a business and all of the costs.
I'm sorry, but Ukraine at this moment is not on the map of international investors. There is no investment in Ukraine. And the only way to bring investment in Ukraine, for the first time in history, to put Ukraine on the world map of investments, you need to deregulate.
Now, when we talk about reforms, when I've spoken to my Georgian friends before, they made it a point that there, to a certain extent, you can talk about two types. You can talk about big reforms that people remember that they see. So, for instance, in Georgia, while you were president building the new business center, the people knew it was modern architecture, it was a visible sign that something had changed, and that you have other reforms that take much more time to come to fruition. But people in Ukraine are frustrated because they don't see one or the other. I mean, why hasn't this happened, and how do you make those happen?
Well, Ukraine is much easier in terms of implementing reforms, initiating them, because people generally are law-abiding. This is a very, very civilized, quite well-read, educated overall society, very law-abiding by nature, as I said. So it's not really, it's a matter of political will. You have a system where there is a vested interest for it to exist for too many people. And so what you do, then you have small minority in that system, and they should become the decision makers, and they force upon the others, upon the minority who have the stake in keeping it intact, to change. And if they don't comply, get rid of them. That's a very simple procedure.
So we encouraged our audience to ask the question and also answer our question. It was, does hiring veteran Georgian politicians, foreign bureaucrats, help Ukraine to reform? Anders Oslund answered that Ukraine needs most of all to hire people who can be trusted 100%, not to be corrupt. But from what I've learned from some of the foreign advisors, that it's very, very hard sometimes to get into and to have, even having a very bright ideas, to make them enforced. So what are your tools, and what are particular instruments and your guarantee that you may do something or influence something, being a disadvisor? Well,
there is no general thing as a foreign advisor. I mean, I'm not as much foreign myself. I lived in Ukraine for almost 8 years out of my not such a long life. I had, I speak language, I have lots of friends here. I was part of your political processes, especially starting from the Orange Revolution. I was part of the last Maidan. And so, so I understand more or less the reality of Ukrainian politics. Now, the others, I mean, it's a big difference, say, between Georgian and Estonian an Australian, because these are people should understand post-Soviet realities. Estonia was very different in Soviet Union. They were not that corrupt. They were not that criminalized. Georgia was hopeless. Georgia was the worst case. So somebody who understands post-Soviet realities can really understand and get more grip of what's really happening. You can bring just the brightest American, and he will have no clue how to do it.
With this particular advisory board, what are your authority? How can it be that who has given you any guarantee that your advice or your some kind of a proposition will be heard and would be implemented?
Look, for the primary partner for anybody who is embarks upon trying to change something here is in the Ukrainian public. I strongly believe that President Poroshenko has strong will, and it's something many people don't agree with, but the fact speaks for themselves, because he really invited lots of foreigners. He brought in, say, former Minister of Interior of Georgia to reform Ukrainian police. He's making some changes now in the anti-corruption bodies and prosecutor's office, and also wants to invite some Georgians there. He brought, and together with Minister Petrenko, first Deputy Minister of Justice, who is really doing deregulation here. So he really, I mean, we have the Minister of Health here. So, I mean, he really, and there's, by the way, important reform going now in Kiev Mayor's office, which people don't notice yet, but it's also a big group of Georgians doing that, deregulation and making things simple. Like, for instance, construction permit. I would love, for instance, to build a very small house, because I cannot afford it. If I move to Kiev, I cannot afford to have a big house in Ukraine. But all the old bureaucrats had big houses. So if you so I cannot, like, if you buy something, you cannot. These houses are not affordable for me. So I want to build a small house, but everybody's warning me. Getting construction permit here is almost impossible, right? But now we have a change there. In Georgia, it was like that. You get it in 1-2 days, and these kind of things that will make difference for all the regular
Well, and
people.
here I have a question off of that. What is the difference, between people who can recommend reforms generally and abstractly, and someone who can actually get things done? Because as you mentioned, there are examples of people that can suggest reforms, and then there are people who are good at actually pushing it through and making
connecting to the people, that's the only difference. Actually, generally the whole thing when they say, oh, this reform is so unpopular, we should impose them, I don't believe in it, because I don't believe that real reforms are always popular if you properly explain them. If you cannot explain them, that means that you are not sure of them yourself, because the reform is an idea. Charisma is communicating the ideas. If idea is worthwhile, worth communicating, you should first believe it yourself, and then give it to the other, share it with the other people.
Is a vital part of the whole process.
Communication and getting public support, and of course getting centralized political will at the top. And I think at the top there is the full realization now that life as usual cannot continue, business as usual cannot continue. This country doesn't have too much resources. You got a short respite now with some lull in fighting, but every day, every hour should be used for proper goals.
And then people expect that. Now, I mean, turning back to your experience as a president and working in that sphere, I mean, how do you work in a country that, has a frozen conflict or has an ongoing conflict that has to be dealt with? How do you enact reforms with that situation?
Pros and cons. We had, under my presidency, almost every year we were bombarded by the Russian aviation in different parts of Georgia. We had casualties. We had terrorist attacks organized by the Russians. We had full-blown energy embargo. We had full-blown economic embargo. We had full-blown expulsion of thousands and tens of thousands of migrants. For a small country, it's a lot, from Russia. Visa embargo. They were not giving visas to us anymore. So actually, and then what it led us to, we became energy-wise fully independent from Russia. We became market-wise almost fully independent from Russia. But
it must make the work more challenging. I mean, to enact reforms alone is hard. And in Ukraine, as you mentioned, so much money goes to the war.
It was following us. So in Georgia, Georgia also was spending a lot on defense. And sometimes I was thinking, well, it's worthwhile, better to spend fully, say, on education. Well, there are these handicaps connected with security situation, but on the other hand, then you have to also speeds up and bolster some of the more radical and more decisive steps in terms of reforms.
I remember I had a chance to talk to you prior to the war in Georgia, and the question so far, looking how it all had developed, what you personally, as a president of Georgia, could have done differently?
No, not much. When you are in that tunnel with the Russians who are after you, the only thing you can do is just to quit the position, surrender, and then they maybe would have let it give us that might have more time.
So, any mistakes, anything which could be done differently?
You make mistakes on a daily basis, but not with regards of Russia. I don't think we made any mistakes towards Russia. I think it's a defeatist Western opinions that all these small countries, they just provoke Russians, and Russians are mysterious, strange people. I mean, Putin, he's a little bit weird, so, you don't have really to provoke him, to poke bear in the eyes. This is typical defeatist views, this kind of people, army of useful idiots in the West, kind of the ones who also bolstered Nazis before and Stalin in the previous century.
To focus on a point that you brought up, I mean, what role can a small country that is a neighbor of Russia play? I mean, since your presidency, Georgia has, taken a much softer note in terms of Russian relations. They haven't imposed sanctions over any of this. There hasn't been anything like that. Is that how neighbors of Russia have to act? Do they have to be quiet and avoid conflict?
Right now there is a government in Georgia led by pro-Russian, Russian oligarch. The biggest private shareholder of Gazprom. They expressly refused to support Ukraine. They called for not arming Ukraine. They terrorized the families and the concrete Georgia soldiers and officers who are fighting for Ukraine. They started criminal cases against hundreds of them. They refused to vote against the resolutions at the UN that basically were submitted by Russia to denounce so-called Ukraine Nazism and fascism. They've done everything Russia asked them to do, but it doesn't mean that Russia gave them back anything. And that's the whole thing, that whatever you do, you can feed the crocodile. Crocodile might stay away in terms of eating you for a while, but at the very moment Russia has enough time and respite, or they feel that they've already steered the Ukrainian situation irreversibly in their direction, they'll go again after Georgia. That's inevitable. Then we would just have the government that would be so weak by that time, without any support from the people and without any support from the West. And that's, in the end, we disappeared from Western radars now.
And there was another comment from our audience that on this question about the hiring veteran Georgian politician, that it may help reform, but it may hurt the ceasefire aspect, because I doubt Mr. Putin approves Saakashvili's hiring. And yes, what is your role in Russian-Ukrainian relations? Do you think, especially at this time, appointing you as a position in the Ukrainian government is a provocation for Russia, when there is at least an idea to have some kind of a deal?
Well, I think, first of all, Putin thinks that Poroshenko as well is a CIA operative, as well as from his standpoint, I'm a CIA operative. Anybody who stands up for freedom and independence of their countries are CIA operatives. So at this stage, I think he has much bigger problems with the existing Ukrainian leadership than with former leadership of other countries. That's the first thing to be taken into account. Second, I think Ukraine has proven that it's taking decision independently of what Russia has to say, or what Europeans think would irritate for Russia, because Europeans, there is also this part of Europeans that are very defeatist. This is, you are being watched by many Ukrainians or well-wishers of Ukraine, especially also in the Northern Hemisphere and in the Western Hemisphere in the United States and Canada. And I think it's very important for all of us to mobilize, to sideline this defeatist Western opinion that obviously exists, and we really need to force democratically elected government of those countries to supply Ukraine with weapons. That's really important now, not appeasing Putin by saying whether we appoint this or that, or we say this or that. That's not going to change the equation. We need weapons, defensive weapons for Ukraine. They really are called defensive because they are anti-tank weapons. You cannot attack with them, but you can stop attacking tanks, advancing tanks. The Ukraine needs radars to track exactly from where they are being fired at, and Ukraine needs UAVs to see from what's really happening on the ground, whether new artillery is being moved in or whether new attacks are being prepared. So these are defensive things that Ukraine should get, and it only can be received if Ukrainian American or just support of Ukraine, rights to their own congressmen, senators, rights to the White House, and also does other public activities in order to obtain that.
Don't you think there is a debate about the supply and the weapon? There are different opinions, but don't you think there is a bit of wishful thinking? If you speak now also to some of the Georgian, they said during the time of the Georgian war, there wasn't even sanctions towards Russia, that even that was unheard.
Georgia was too small, but in Georgia, Russian advance was stopped with the help of American weapons. I mean, Americans sent Sixth Fleet, and Americans sent planes to Romanian, Hungary, Turkish bases, and basically de facto proclaimed no-fly zone over Georgia. American military, indirect but quite clear, transparent intervention stopped destruction of Georgian statehood in 2008. So that's exactly the example, or that proves what I'm saying.
All right, it's just a very interesting insight.
The weapons can only be stopped by weapons.
And there is currently the case against you in Georgia, and one of our viewers from France asked why the current Georgian government is against appointment of Saakashvili of you in Ukraine. What will be your response on that?
Well, you know,
I mean,
everybody knows this is bullshit, and Georgia, under my leadership, has become from whatever 150 or something place in terms of corruption, number 11 in terms of being least corrupt. Georgia budget has increased 11 times, which means that we didn't steal money. We didn't steal any money, because you cannot just steal little money and give more to the state, if either you steal or not. We have one of the cleanest governments in the history of modern world, and certainly in the history of post-Soviet world, the cleanest one. And of course, they couldn't come with anything else, so they came up with the bullshit like, you know, some staples expenses of presidential service, some official events, suits bought, which I've never hadn't even seen for some official events, you know, this kind of stuff. So in Georgia, it's a laughable stock. International organizations clearly call it political persecution. There are multiple resolutions of European Parliament, Council of Europe, American congressmen and senators have expressed very strong position on that one. U.S. State Department, nobody has doubts about it. You have just a very dirty Russian oligarch running Georgia who is coming up with all these tricks, and he just cannot understand why other people cannot understand what he's saying. And I think
He had been elected. He had been elected
yes,
by
that's
the
how
Georgians.
democracy works, and we gave government in a very transparent, clean manner. We gave them several billions of basically free cash to spend on development projects, which they misappropriated or spend on some stupid programs. We gave them, we basically gave them on-job training, because these were very inexperienced people. But in the end, the result was something that we expected. Georgian economy went into recession. Corruption went up, crime unfortunately went up, and some of the things have been reversed. But they know every people is learning on their own experiences, so that's why democracy is so beautiful.
So summing up, we're really grateful for you, but maybe would you remind how many now, because we're coming to this topic again, how many IDPs, how many internally displaced people?
We have 500,000 people out of Georgia's population of 4.7 million overall, which basically shows that wherever there is Russian peace, there is no peace and there is no future. So we should get out of this Russian peace, and I think only Ukraine can do that. Of course, all the other peoples are part of it. We have my compatriots fighting alongside your troops, and we have me and others just trying to help you with whatever expertise and advice we can share.
So thanks so much.